Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webcast, The Cloud and Data Convergence Embed Intelligence Everywhere. My name is Lee Simmons, and I am your moderator, and our presentation today is brought to you by our partner and presenter, Laura Kelly. Laura is D&B's Chief Product Officer responsible for the company's global product portfolios, including development and execution of our future product strategy. She has previously served in leadership positions at American Express, MasterCard Worldwide, and USAA, among others. And today's webinar explores the current trends in high tech as well as how businesses are empowering their growth by leveraging smart workflows. And for those of you in the audience who have a question for Laura, please enter it into the Q&A panel at any time. And now for today's presentation, Laura Kelly.
Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon to those of you who might live in another part of the world. Very much welcome you today. I appreciate you taking the time to visit with us today and to talk about a very critical topic, something that's on the minds of many business people and the hearts of many business people about how are they going to deal with big data. What are the steps that they might take to go forward with big data? So this morning we're going to talk a little bit about a couple of things to lay out the groundwork, and we're going to have some case studies as well. So hopefully you can connect to some of the real things that individuals are doing, business people are doing, that are helping them use big data to drive their business's growth. So we'll start with some trends and just overall what we're seeing in the world today with a lot of statistics and facts around what's happening with big data and why we call it big data. We'll also talk about some of the ways to empower business growth. We basically have about a three-step process that we're going to suggest to you that you might want to consider as you go down the big data journey and as you try to understand how to leverage all of the sources of data available in the world today to drive your business. And then the third thing we'll just touch on is why it matters. It really matters a lot to have a great source of data. It only matters if it drives your business's growth, if it reduces expenses, and the real, I think the real importance of big data and being able to leverage big data today is in doing exactly that. And then we'll obviously open it up for questions and answers and very much welcome any questions that you might have. So a couple of trends that are going on in the world today. The exponential growth of data is something I think all of us have seen, and it's definitely disrupting the sales process. It's actually just disruptive overall. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that the number of devices and platforms that are in the world today is exponentially more than what was in the world just a couple of years ago. We have so many different formats that we're working with in terms of laptops, tablets, mobile phones, that really being able to get information across to people that are not necessarily sitting at a desk has become incredibly important. Most salespeople don't sit at a desk, I think, as most of you know, and being able to get information to them when they're thinking about either prospecting for a sales call or preparing for a sales call is very important, and we'll talk with you about some examples of that as we go forward. The other thing that's really driving the exponential nature of data growth, and you'll see this in some of the statistics, is that structured and unstructured data are coming together. The amount of unstructured data in the world today is phenomenally increasing, and that's because every human being on the planet has the ability to create data. And so as a result of that, probably 95% of that data being created is of no use to you as a business, but there is some parts of that that can be used. And so being able to sort of filter out the signal-to-noise ratio is becoming increasingly important in terms of structured and unstructured data. And then I think the third thing is really just the speed of growth. It's really the amount of data in the world is proliferating at such a rate that it really is becoming increasingly difficult to be able to manage it. So big data is absolutely becoming disruptive. In terms of the other disruptive forces is technological change, and I know many of you are either looking at or are leveraging cloud-based applications. I think big data is now the second most favorite word of business people. It used to be cloud-based, now it's big data. But the interesting thing about cloud-based and big data is that the two of those actually coexist and should coexist in a way that helps manage your business. Competition is becoming fierce, and some of the Silicon Valley upstarts are actually becoming quite competitors to some of the more traditional companies. And as a result of that, speed becomes critical. One of the advantages that some of the larger companies actually do have against some of the smaller upstarts is that they do have within their own very walls a significant amount of data that they can leverage in order to be a better competitor. They also have the ability and generally the capital to be able to access external sources of data to feed those internal sources and have a much more robust ability to make decisions and to drive the business. So as you think about how you compete with smaller companies and upstarts, really big companies have a very significant advantage in terms of what's available to them from a big data perspective. I know many of you on the phone are risk managers, and certainly D&B has a core strength in helping you manage credit risk and helping you manage the risks that are associated with your businesses, such as supplier risk. Really, risk managers are getting, and you'll see this in one of the case studies, they're getting challenged with becoming more opportunity managers. It's really important from a risk management perspective to figure out how to balance managing the most critical risks that you might have as a company, and while doing that, not reducing the opportunity for growth. And that's a really difficult tightrope to walk because I think many of the businesses that I interact with want the trade credit risk, for example, to be zero. And really, if it's at zero, you're walking away from business that would be important and profitable for your company. So it's very much of a tightrope, and what big data does for us in walking that tightrope is it provides facts and information that helps us predict what risks we might be willing to take and what risks we need to walk away from. So very, very critical in terms of managing risk. If you take a supplier example, many of you have supply chains that are extensive globally. You might have a very good sense of who your direct suppliers are and a very poor sense of who their supplier and their suppliers are. And again, that creates risk. So being able to leverage data in a way so you have visibility and transparency into that supply chain is very, very important from a business perspective. IT has become a huge business enabler. I've always thought of IT as a tremendous partner in my role as product, and they make real the ideas and the innovations that I want to bring to market. So I've always had a great sweet spot in my heart for IT professionals, but even more now that they are basically sitting on the stores and the platforms, and the ability to access that data is all driven by IT. So not only are risk managers becoming opportunity managers and a very critical seat at the table in terms of driving growth, but IT professionals are becoming increasingly important in terms of being able to actually tap into some of the big data assets that are happening around the world. And I would submit that, in fact, without a very well-run, efficient IT department, there would be no way for a business to get access to the information that they need for decision making. One of the things that we recognize having one of the huge stores of big data on the planet is that it really is not just about the data, it's about the insight. Many companies have huge stores of data, and they don't really leverage that data to make decisions. In fact, 80% of the companies, according to a recent survey, had not yet really figured out how to leverage big data. There's about 69% of those companies that are thinking about it, they're planning for it, they're implementing it, but there's a huge number of companies that are really trying to solve this very core issue today. So having that data and turning that into insight, having it help you predict what your next move might be, what market you might go into, what product you might have, what supplier you might add to your supply chain. That's all very relevant information in terms of really leveraging big data to make those very difficult and very, very critical decisions. So as we think about big data, it's really not as much about the data as it is about the insight that it drives. And having 1,000 points of light to be able to drive insight is much, much more relevant and much more accurate than having 10 points of insight. And so being able to really leverage that information to be able to make decisions is critical and very important from a company perspective. But we've talked a little bit about the big data challenge and the velocity of information, and this chart really talks to the velocity of information and how quickly data is changing and really becoming completely new. But it also talks to the cacophony of internal and external data that we as data managers or as business people are trying to have access to. And I think it does a very good job of really identifying just how complex this web of information is from a big data perspective, and why it's so important to really think about how to leverage this information for your behalf. And it's really enterprise-wide. Many times big data becomes the purview of the data scientist in the company, and in reality, it's that data scientist that's helping all of the functional departments leverage that big data for their behalf. So, for example, if you are operating a supply chain and you're worried about the health of your suppliers or the location of your suppliers because there's been a recent catastrophe, or the ability of your suppliers to be able to provide a supply chain that is seamless to you and so that the goods and services that you buy are dependable. That is all the purview of really finding out what information you can get on those suppliers, and that information is not just the standard traditional structured information, it is also the unstructured data. I know several companies that today are using unstructured data in a very meaningful way to track brand sentiment, which is another example, and to find out whether or not customers are happy with them or not happy with them. And certainly many companies, if not all companies, have a few customers that are unhappy or have created websites that are negative. But that sentiment can be gathered up in a very productive way with big data tools to be able to really identify if that's just a one-off customer experience or if there really is an issue with regards to the customer experience that might impact the brand. So it's really the first time we've ever had tools, social tools, available to us as business people to be able to track the pulse of what people are thinking about our brand. So it's another example, a marketing example or a brand example of why big data is so very important and why the merging and systematic review of both structured and unstructured data is critical for us as business people. This next chart really talks to, if you wondered how much data there is in the world and what's being created, this gives a number of proof points on just the sea of big data that's being created in our companies today. It's not just the emails, and I'm sure most of you are wondering why you're probably the one that gets the 250 billion emails. I think I might be one of those people. There's an awful lot of email traffic sent out. It's also the fact that 90% of the world's data didn't even exist or was just created in the last 2 years. And I would submit of that 90%, probably 95% of it is completely irrelevant to any business decision that you're making today. So it's really, this is what is creating the type of information that we have, and it's also what's creating a very, very critical need to be able to capture that data, structure that data, and figure out what relevant problems that data may solve, and then use that data to be able to make those decisions. So let's talk about how we think we may be able to use big data. This is complex stuff. It's one of those problems that's very difficult to solve. So we're going to break it up into three major elements. I think almost everything in the world can be broken up into three things, and so we're going to give it a try on something as complex as big data. One of the places to start is just the basics of integrating the data across systems and your data sources. So right now, most companies have data sources that are in finance. They might have them in marketing. They might have data sources that they buy from external data providers. What we generally tend to find across companies is that, for example, they don't have one CRM. So even within the world of sales and marketing, they may have multiple data sources. We have many customers that have 9 or 10 versions of their CRMs or multiple CRMs within companies because of merger and acquisition activity. And as a result of that, being able just to integrate what you have is absolutely the first step that you need to take, because it's sort of like an inventory of what you can use in terms of solving some of the business problems that you might have. As you're integrating the data, what I would submit to you is that you really think about what are the problems that you're trying to solve. One of the reasons big data can be frustrating is because once you've integrated it and you have it all, then the next question is, what are you going to do with it? Because it's a little bit daunting. So as you're integrating data, think about it. Am I trying to figure out how to sell more into new markets Am I trying to figure out what products I should develop and invest in? Am I trying to figure out how my suppliers are behaving and are they in good health or are they a brand risk? What is the problem that you're trying to solve? And as you integrate this data across sources, you're able to really be able to start seeing and illuminate those problems in a much different way that will make it easier for you to address them as a business person. The second step of the journey is really making that insight accessible. So as I talked about integrating data across systems and data sources, and I talked about the questions or the problems that you're trying to solve, then figure out who is it that's trying to solve those problems, which shouldn't be a very difficult journey because I think most business people have real clear objectives about what it is that they're trying to solve. But making that insight accessible to those decision makers so that it's not hard for them to get to it. I know many business people who, in order to answer basic questions such as prospecting questions, have to themselves access through some type of a tool multiple data sources and then try to put those data sources together in such a way where it's meaningful for them. What that really means is that there's a lot of problems that they don't solve because they don't have the time to do that work for every single problem that they have. So the second step of the journey, and a very, very important step of the journey, is figure out, and this is where the IT department becomes such a great partner, figure out how to make that insight accessible. How do you string that data together in such a way where you can provide more predictive tools for the individuals that need to make those business decisions? And what insights might you draw from the amazing amount of data you may have, which is both internal and external? And as you make this journey, thinking about where the external sources of data might be that might be relevant to you is also an obviously major part of the journey. The next step in the journey that we're taking on big data is presenting the insight and data visually. And this is becoming increasingly important, and let me give you a couple of reasons why. We are all consumers at some level, and as a result of that, most of us shop on Amazon or on other sites that have done an incredibly good job of making the entire workflow very, very easy and navigable and something that is just completely, normal for us to do. As a result of that, we bring those consumer expectations into the workplace, and we want to have our work tools be just as easy to navigate. The human eye, of all of our senses, the human eye is the sense that allows us to be able to process and basically take in information at a very rapid rate of speed. And as a result of that, making data visual is absolutely critical to actually making it usable, and it improves the speed to the individual decision maker radically. Let me give you another example of presenting data visually. I'm not sure how many of you follow the show Squawk Box, but one of the things that they do that I think is a perfect example of data visualization is they actually have a part of the show where they have all of the world's markets in either red or green, based on whether the market for that particular country is going up or down. So you can literally see, as a person watching on the TV, the world and where the world is at that particular point in time. It's a perfect example of where visualization of data is absolutely critical in terms of helping the business decision makers not only understand what's occurring, but be able to act on it. So this is really all important in terms of the top three challenges. We have a number of challenges in terms of business people and business analytics. And as we've talked about over the last few minutes, these are all challenges that I've talked about in terms of integration, quality, and really figuring out how to integrate it with your enterprise applications, such as your CRM systems or your ERPs. As we move to the next chart, we're talking a little bit about the integration of data. And very much, as I mentioned, the first step of the journey is really trying to figure out how to take all of this information that is coming at you and putting it in some kind of format that makes sense. One of the things I think D&B does very well, and I'll do a little bit of a mini commercial here, I apologize for that, is we do have something called the DUNS number. And what the DUNS number does do is it allows us to take a lot of disparate data for our customers and structure it in such a way so they can actually put a data set of information along with a given business. And that is it's really magical in many ways because it allows be able to take this proliferation of information and structure it and associate it with a given business, which is what really is the secret sauce for helping you use this information in a positive way. Then one of the things that we're working very closely with our customers on is actually delivering that data once it's matched and synchronized into our customers' ERPs or CRM systems or SCM systems. Each one of these systems has its own format, but we can basically pull the information, structure it in a very easy to assimilate way, and then deliver it to those CRMs. And the benefit of that is that as an individual actually goes to their desk and does their daily workflow and they work in those tools, they're not having to sit down, as I mentioned before, and try to figure out what data source do they need and then what do they do with it once they have it. It's delivered to them at their desktop. So a very, very simple and easy way of having information being used in a very favorable way and being able to make decisions. We also have a couple of products that we have where we deliver data directly through a workflow tool. And these are very critical products for our customers. DNBI is an example of that, as well as Hoover's and our supplier portal product. All of those actually provide a workflow tool so that individuals seeking to get information have our data at their fingerprints. So it's either integrating it into the ERMs, which is a very simple way, a very intuitive way of helping our customers assimilate data, or having it through a product that you may be using on a day-to-day basis. The other point of integration is really trying to figure out how do I get this information as simple as possible. So, for example, if you are really trying to think about leads, you have a lot of data in your system, you want to be able to establish some way of managing leads for your sales force. You've got a lot of poor quality or inaccurate leads, you've got high abandonment rates, there's no way to automatically deliver leads to marketing automation, you need a way to more efficiently collect leads and find information, you're spending too much time manually trying to understand by cruising the internet what that lead is worth and what's information to back up that lead. And we've just put out a product called D&B Direct. It's been out in market about a year, which basically takes the information that you need as a company and it delivers it directly to you in the format that you need it. So, for example, if you needed to populate some type of lead form, we have that application live and working for our customers. And it really makes it much easier for them because it makes it much more efficient for them to basically take information, we structure it, and we help them put this information in a way where it's consumable, and then we basically attach it into their sales system. Very, very good example of where we've been able to help customers structure their data. Another example of making Insight accessible is really to pull information, and this is an example of a First Research product. First Research is a product that we use to help our customers prepare for sales calls. And as a result of that, a typical salesperson may have a need to understand the industry that a company that they're calling on is. They may want to understand the people that they're calling on and a little bit of background on them, so that they can structure a conversation around challenges and opportunities of that business and have the right discussion with the right executive so that they can sell in whatever goods and services that they want to sell in. It's a critical part of the preparation, and what we're finding is that there is a lot of preparation that's actually done before you have a face-to-face call. And so not being able to get access to this type of information to fuel that conversation in a positive way is a really, really important it's an important attribute and an important capability that you want to have when you're managing big data. I think the other accessibility is really thinking back towards the fact that the data exists across your enterprise. It exists in finance operations, marketing, sales and service, and probably actually other places, and even within those verticals within multiple places. So it's definitely all over the enterprise. But if you think about what would you use it for in finance, just some examples of certainly credit. I know there's many credit managers on the phone managing that portfolio in such a way where you optimize your sales but you minimize your bad debt ratio. Very important. In terms of operations, we have a lot of examples around supplier performance, and I've talked a little bit about some of those, but really being able to understand your suppliers. This is becoming increasingly important for companies with global supply chains, and I think you've probably seen the news on several companies that have gotten very significant fines for lack of ability to comply. Much of this is because they don't have the information at their fingertips to be able to make sure that they do comply with regulations such as FCPA or anti-bribery type requirements. So there's having information that allows you to vet a supplier and to understand if they create any compliance responsibility or issues for you is absolutely critical to your business, and it's critical to your brand, because all of the companies that have had some of these issues occur to them have faced pretty significant brand damage. If you take a look at the marketing side, I know I've given a number of examples from a marketing perspective, but the whole ability to pull unstructured data and assimilate it into a structured format is critical to marketing. There is so much information out there on the social networks, not only about you as a company to manage your brand, but also about potential customers of companies, and being able to tap into that information and kind of take out the noise, which is probably the most important part of tapping into that information, and finding out if a buyer might be interested in your product or service is critical. It's critical to getting ahead of the competitor. It's critical to growth. And then in terms of just overall sales and service, really understanding your customer activity, being able to understand buyer mapping, territory management, that's all important things that big data helps you do and really tries to understand which of your salespeople are the most effective and efficient at doing their jobs. If you take a look at the next chart, it really is talking about being able to embed this information into workflows and to make it very, very visual. As I mentioned, visual capabilities and visual communications is absolutely critical in terms of being able to communicate information to the individuals that need it. So if you take a look at this example, we've got Microsoft Dynamics, which is a very powerful tool that many of our companies use. If we take the risk information that we have on a regular basis, and we are able to through our risk pre-screen, tell an individual that this is a green client, this is a company where the risk is very minimal, that actually empowers a salesperson to have a very constructive conversation with that potential client and know that if they're able to sell something in, that this is a company that has the credit to be able to support that sale. From an industry research perspective, again, pulling that information all the way into the Microsoft Dynamics system or Salesforce or any of the other types of systems like this, so where that salesperson, again, has at their fingertips what's happening with a given industry and where they might integrate that information into the conversation that they're having with a potential customer. And then, as I mentioned, social and news becoming increasingly important in terms of really making those visits, those sales opportunities as effective as possible by pulling information down from the social networks, by understanding the news. And I'm not talking just, what's occurring on the news, but the propensity. So if you have a company that has a very high propensity of certain news happening, then you have a much better understanding of what they might be focused on as a company, and it makes that sales conversation more productive and more likely to end in an end sale. Here's another example of presenting insight visually that's one of my favorites. We are working on a product called Mobility Plus, which actually allows a salesperson to, with a smartphone or a tablet, to be able to have access to a tremendous amount of information right at their fingertips. And there's a couple of reasons why this is important for those of you who are not in sales. One thing that salespeople like to do is they like to sell and they hate administrative tasks. So the easier you can make it for them to sell, the more likely they are going to be successful at that. If they're sitting there in a car and they've had a cancellation on a potential sales appointment, and they're thinking, well, I'm in the office supplies business, where could I go for finding out, another potential client? What Mobility Plus does, it really allows you to kind of surface that, take a look at that entire area from a geo perspective, understand who's close to you, and then actually do some research on that potential prospect as well as understand the potential credit risk. So it wraps everything up in one place so that that salesperson can be very, very productive, call on that client, and hopefully make that next sale. It also has some features in it which help the territory manager, and territory managers always have a really difficult job in trying to optimize and make as productive their sales force as possible. So from a territory management perspective, it provides information and access to understanding how productive that sales force is being in a given day. I think it's a really amazing use of technology. I don't know how many of you, just to give another example that's completely outside our space, are familiar with UPS. UPS uses this type of data to make sure their drivers primarily make right turns. And the reason they do that is it's much more safe to make right turns, and it gets to their destinations quicker. And that's all by leveraging big data. Completely outside of our space, but I just thought it was an interesting example of how you can use mobility tools and big data, marry them up together, and come up with a much better outcome. Let's go through a couple of case studies, because I do think case studies tend to bring this to life for individuals and for business people. The first one I'm going to talk about a little bit is Commerce Bank. Commerce Bank, very successful bank, they really were trying to figure out the problem that I mentioned earlier, was who were they leaving on the cutting room floor in terms of potential prospects or customers. What customers should they have lent to that they did not, because they were using very structured traditional risk management techniques. So what Commerce Bank did is they actually used some predictive tools and pulled in additional sources of data in order to predict whether or not a business would be viable to lend money to, and at what level would that business be viable, and oh, by the way, at what rate would that business be viable. So not only were they able to increase the number of customers that they had, but they were able to increase their revenue stream because they were able to charge a much more appropriate rate for that risk. So I think it's a very good example of how someone moved outside of the traditional historical perspective at looking at a customer and moved into the predictive realm. And if you take the iceberg example, it really did do a lot from a positive perspective to drive their revenues. Another example is Rico, and this is a marketing example, and I think I've given a couple of these as I've gone through, so I won't dwell on this too long. But Rico had a huge number of contacts and a huge number of accounts, and so being able to understand and anticipate those client needs was really critical for them. So what they have done is they've really used big data to take and our services through our matching and cleansing to structure their data in such a way where it would be more meaningful for the territory managers and the salespeople, so that they would reduce duplication, so that they would understand where they might be doing business with a company in one region, but they weren't doing business with that same company in another region, where they could look at where they might have vertical access, like in some cases they might be very strong in a particular vertical, so that might enable them to package up a particular product in a way that would resonate with that vertical client or that vertical opportunity. It really gave them a lot of different ways to think about how they sold in and drove revenues for Rico. Another example is a large oil and gas company, and I think, especially given all the focus on compliance, anybody that is in a multinational supply chain probably stays awake at night thinking about managing their suppliers. And so one of the things that we have done to help customers with that dilemma is really putting together a portal whereby customers can use that portal to basically sign on their suppliers and, oh, by the way, get their suppliers to sign on their suppliers. By doing that, we can work with them to provide much better understanding of who they're doing business with, not only from a health perspective, but geographically. So, for example, if there's a catastrophe in a particular area, that customer will know immediately how that's impacting their supply chain. Really critical and very important. It also helps from a brand perspective on things like where you've got particular providers in the retail industry, for example, it's been plagued with issues with child labor and factories that have not been up to standard. Really having an information loop that can help you understand those types of suppliers is critical from a brand perspective, so that you don't risk yourself on being on the front page news in a negative situation. So from the oil and gas perspective, this has been extremely valuable. It's been interesting because it started out being valuable just in terms of them understanding who their suppliers were. It's actually ended up being valuable in a multiple of ways. For example, if they decided that they wanted to have a diversity initiative and have much more women or minority-owned businesses, they can use this tool for that purpose. And that's been very helpful for them to try to solve some of those pinpoint needs that they have. If they're trying to comply with the multitude of laws that they have to comply with, this allows them to tap into their supply chain pretty much immediately to understand who it is that they need to report on with regards to any of those particular regulatory activities. So it's been one of those things that we actually implemented with a customer that started out as something reasonably simple and has ended up being extremely powerful for them in terms of managing their supply chain. So I think I'm a finance geek as of my original profession, so you'll have to forgive me. Everything has to end with an ROI or else I lose interest pretty quickly. So from this perspective, one of the questions that I ask is this really helping our customers grow, and is this helping our customers increase their ROIs? And the good answer is yes, it is, and it's doing it in a number of ways. It's certainly increasing sales productivity. We've seen in many of our examples 15% shorter sales cycle, and that's all due to the increased ability to prepare and to understand who it is that might be interested in buying your products through predictive insights. The other place is the growth in deal sizes. We've actually seen a pretty significant growth in deal sizes in terms of increased sales opportunities. We also know from conversations with our customers that the mobility tool that we're putting in market has got tremendous potential to allow salespeople to very quickly submit a potential prospect for credit and to try to automate that process as much as possible. Right now, we do show them whether or not it's a red, yellow, green type of a customer, but we are also working on tools that will allow that whole credit application process to be automated for certain sizes of deals. We certainly wouldn't want to give that capability out to huge deals, but there's certain levels of deals and certain customers where that approval process ought to be on the spot, because once that salesperson leaves that decision maker's office, there's always the risk that individual will change their mind, that a competitor will come in with a lower price, and that something will happen that will make that deal go away. So as quickly as you can get from the buyer wants to buy to you're approved for credit, that should be nanoseconds. It should be quicker than Amazon delivers goods to our houses. In terms of retention, this was sort of a side benefit that I didn't expect. We definitely have seen increased retentions in terms of improving the overall customer experience, and I think that's just that people want to do business with people that are easy to do business with. I think it's really that simple. So being able to increase your retention, obviously the most expensive customer is the one you have to acquire, and the least expensive customer that you have is the one that you have. And so being able to retain those customers drives profitability overall. And the side benefit of this is this was all with lower overall cost of the business, because some of this was actually being done with customers, but it was being done manually. As I had mentioned before, it was being done through individuals who were not skilled in collecting data, trying to collect data through Excel spreadsheets and other types of tools that were really not fit for purpose. And so by making this all resident within their existing workflows, or by using a tool that provides a workflow for them, it makes it so much easier for that individual to actually deliver for you as an employee what you want them to deliver. It also, I would suggest, increases employee engagement, which is a side benefit, right? Because employees are no longer faced with these daunting tasks that are kind of difficult and complex in terms of collecting information, because it's much more seamless. So now they can spend their time actually thinking about solving the problem that you hired them to solve in the first place. So I think it definitely has a positive benefit from that perspective. But it's a journey. I can tell you right now, it's totally a journey. There's about, I think, 12% of the companies right now are actually implementing some of these big data capabilities, and as I mentioned, about 69% are either implementing or in some type of planning process. Probably many of you on the phone are on that journey. So you may start out with a very traditional product solution where you're collecting data through D&B and other sources, and you're basically populating that data into your regular data supply chain, and you're proliferating that throughout the businesses and throughout the functional areas. that's a good place to start. It is definitely a place to start. And then I think where we've seen customers move is into an API environment where they're pulling data down instead of through batch or some type of toolkit capability, where they're pulling data down through APIs. And the benefit of that is they can actually get a much more discrete set of data that is more relevant to them, and it's instantaneous. So it's not something that they have to wait for a batch file to run. It's instantaneous. It is the consumer corollary I would use that. It's like moving from a tape or a cassette to a DVD or a CD to a DVD. So if those of you in the audience that don't remember what a cassette tape is, it's for you a CD to a DVD or to a MP3 file. It's that type of change that we see in the market, moving from a batch to an API. And then, but the end state, the one we all want to be in, is embedded in real time because it makes it so easy for your employees to access the information, and it's timely, and that's very critical in terms of making information decisions and making the biggest decisions that you make as a company. I think many of you, certainly I hope you know this, that D&B is very committed to you as a customer, and we are on a journey, especially with our new CEO who's extremely customer focused, on really trying to do as much as we can to listen to you and partner with you. We have had great success. The best successes we have is when we work very closely with our customers to solve their most pressing challenges, and we feel really good about that, and our customers get great benefits out of that, and I think that's really where we want to be and where we want to be as a partner. So as you think about those types of challenges, then think about D&B as helping you solve those. So I'm going to stop and take a look at the questions that you've asked, but very much look forward to your questions. There's already been a couple that have been submitted, so I'm going to go ahead and address some of those, but as you're thinking about that, please send those questions in.
Thank you, Laura. And once again, for those in the audience, if you have a question for Laura Kelly, just enter it into the Q&A panel. And Laura, to kick things off, I'm wondering if you could speak briefly to what you believe is really going to be the biggest data challenge facing businesses next year.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the biggest data challenge is facing businesses next year is just the signal-to-noise ratio, right? It's the ability to pull all this information in and get something out that's meaningful. I don't know how many of you in the audience have set up a data warehouse. This is a very common thing that was done 10 years ago, and it was being able to pull all the data into one place and have magical access to it. And many of those projects failed because it was so difficult to structure that data in a way where it was meaningful. So, it's really, I think the biggest problem is trying to understand what data you need, what problems that you want to solve, and then how do you structure that data in such a way that you can actually make meaningful progress towards solving those problems. That would be my big thing to worry about for next year.
And Laura, what approaches and tools do you think businesses could leverage to effectively deliver third-party data sources?
Well, there's a number of approaches and tools. I think, again, you start out with what's the problem that you're trying to solve and what are the data sources that are available to understanding how, or making meaningful progress towards solving that problem. I think the thing that's so critical is really structuring that data in a way where it's meaningful and doing that through some type, we use the DUNS number, we're obviously very proud of that. But if you don't have a way to take the data and attach it to something, then all you have is a bunch of unattached data, which doesn't do anybody any good. So if you when we work with customers, we use that DUNS number as the single key to pull all that together. There may be other ways of doing that, but I've seen companies that think, for example, they have an account number that's the same across systems, and in reality it's not. And what we've actually done to help some of those companies is we've taken the DUNS number and taken what might be a proliferation of the same company having accounts with them and put it all into one place. And so if you don't have that common key, it's really important that you figure that out so that you can actually understand what you're doing with your customers.
And how do you see companies leveraging social data sources?
Social is really an interesting space. When I talk about unstructured data, one of the questions that's corollary to this, I'm going to answer both at one time, the examples of structured and unstructured data. One of the examples of unstructured data is social, and it's unstructured just because it is, right? It's me getting out on Twitter and saying something about something that may be meaningful and may not be meaningful. I was just talking to a company in the social space, very good company in the social space, and one of the things that they do is they're very powerful on their analytics, using analytics to take social data and make it meaningful. And in doing that, they actually found that while Twitter has probably 90%, 95% of stuff that you don't really want to pay attention to, you know, that I went to have a Starbucks today or something like that, that's not necessarily meaningful to a company, unless you're Starbucks, they got a much earlier radar about when things were occurring. And there's 100 examples of these, right? There's been a number of situations that the world has seen through Twitter before we saw them through the news. That is no different in business. And as a result of that, social data is going to become critical to being able to understand not only your business and your brand and your customers, but other people's businesses and where you might have our opportunities for them. It's not a panacea, and it can't be done without structured data. At least I don't think so at this point in time. Like it won't, I don't think it replaces all of the structured data that most companies have within their worlds or what they're buying, but it's becoming a much more relevant and critical part of understanding what's happening in the universe. If you look at macroeconomic trends, it's another place where you'll see social data really inform macroeconomic trends. It also is an interesting way of looking at things globally without having to be global. You can pull in global information quite quickly, social information, that will give you indications of where whole economies are going. And so I just think it's a remarkably powerful tool as long as you can reduce the signal to noise, which is really critical because there is a bunch of stuff out there that is just not really meaningful. And I think that's why a lot of companies sort of roll their eyes when somebody comes in and talks to them about social data, when in reality they ought to be thinking about how do you get rid of the noise. And that's where I think the blue ocean is, to use the book's term, the ability to find something that nobody knows at this point in time. So it's an advantage if you can get through your social data in a way that's meaningful to you. It gives you a competitive advantage at this point in time.
And Laura, one of the problems that I think a lot of people find with cloud computing is being out on the road and not having access to your particular cloud. I'm wondering if you could speak to that and how, for instance, somebody in field sales could be able to gain that access when they're, remote most of the time.
Yeah, I mean, we actually solve that with customers. This mobility product that we're working at is in beta with a big customer, and what they are actually signing into is not their cloud because there's security concerns on the part of their company. It's actually our cloud. And as a result of that, they can get all kinds of access into the sales information that they need, and they're not actually touching their system. I do think that over time, that access to the cloud is going to be just like access to anything else. There are a number of security implications of the cloud. Those will be worked out. There's a tremendous number of really smart people working on those. Once those get worked out, the cloud's going to be what it's supposed to be, which is accessible everywhere you are. But I know there are some companies that definitely struggle with how much access do they give to the cloud. The only thing that we probably can't solve today is the places where you don't have mobile access, and there are a few places in the world, actually in the U.S., where you don't have mobile access, so that one I probably can't fix today. But the cloud, we have alternative solutions which can help companies solve that, so that we're managing the security and that they're not into their major system.
And Laura, this is probably right up your alley for somebody with a background in finance, but I'm wondering if you could speak to how, for instance, a manager in an accounting or finance department can use large amounts of data from a CRM to better forecast quarterly sales.
Yeah, that's a great question, and you're right. I've been in that role before and pulled my hair out and did a lot of guessing. I think probably, if you think about the sales that are happening, what's happening right now is that the accountants are looking at the historical sales and they're trying to make some type of relevant prediction based on the growth that's occurred over the last year and try to land on that. It probably would be one of the simple steps you could take is just having much more rapid access into the salespeople so that you knew from the CRM what was happening on the floor, what the propensity of those sales were to close. This is all in the major CRMs. And that you could do a better job if you integrated that information, taking historical information and integrating it with some information that the salespeople are putting in with regards to their pipeline. I think that's a place where you could definitely see a trend. When you start looking at forecasting way out, and that's something that works probably for the next couple of quarters, when you start to talk about forecasting maybe a year or two out where you're actually in budget or planning mode, you might use macroeconomic trends. What's happening in that industry, how is it growing or not growing, and then that should help inform your growth. The other place I would connect into is new, and no surprise on this one either, would be new product, is because new product should drive sales, and as a result of that, as you're forecasting out, you want to make sure you have a handle on what's going to be released out the door that might help. So there's a number of different ways that you can use information, both near-term and far-term, to try to get better accuracy on forecasting. And I'm sure that any of the accountants on the phone probably have 10 other suggestions because it's been a while since I've tried to forecast sales.
And Laura, tying back to this, the notion of social data, what social data in particular would you say is relevant to business?
I think it's a great question, and it's certainly not all relevant. But it's one of those spots where you have to be very careful about picking out what you think is not relevant. Like, I have heard business people say Twitter is totally irrelevant, and I would suggest that it's relevant, and it's relevant probably for a couple of areas like brand tracking and customer happiness with your product. I think it's much more relevant for a B2C company than it is a B2B company. So I think Twitter would be an example of one that people might take off the radar, but in reality it's quite important. There's a lot of information on LinkedIn I think is really interesting, and LinkedIn type sites, especially if you happen to be in the HR department and you want to recruit people. It's amazing. I mean, I've done this myself. If I'm looking for a specific expertise, all you have to do is do a little search and a bunch of people pop up that you probably would never have thought of for potential job opening. So there's social opportunity in that. There is a number of, obviously the blogs are a very interesting source of social opportunity, and I think most of you probably do know that most of the bloggers are paid, so you have to be careful with using that information to do things. But it's actually a way to use and to have the bloggers help you get your product out the door, help you have people find out about the product. So social can be used to find out about yourself. It can be used to actually market your product or service. I think that people have struggled in the B2B realm with examples of where social has been used virally to drive B2B sales, although we've definitely seen that on the B2C side, where social has been used virally to drive B2C sales. So, it really is something that requires, there's social strategists that you hire now, they're quite expensive, but it is something that requires you to sit down and think about your business and what is relevant. And even if you just start with the stuff that's so obviously relevant, you can't ignore it, that's a great place to start. And then just take some of the stuff that nobody thinks is relevant and say, get a couple folks in the room and say, how could this be relevant, and see if you're missing something significant. But the major sites, the major trends like Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter and the blogs that are relevant to your industry and Huffington Post and the other, probably 15 or 20 big spaces where people are interacting socially, you probably should look at every single one of those to see if it's relevant to your business and if it's something that you might learn from. I had an experience with BA, which I thought was pretty fascinating. I was somehow having a difficult time getting a seat on a flight that was like within reason for me to get home from London. They were going to put me on the next flight, which was going to be the next day. So I put a Twitter out there to them and said, look, I'm really tired of having a long trip. Do you think you could figure out a way to accommodate me? So as I was walking through Heathrow and checking at the BA terminal, the attendant said, "We found you a seat. It just happens to be in first class." I thought that was the best Twitter I ever put out there, because I never expected to be in first class coming back from London, but they did find me a seat. Now, I'm sure they can't do that anymore for everybody that makes a comment. This was a number of years ago, but I thought it was really interesting how fast they responded to nothing more than I was sort of whining about having to be on the flight the next day. So, you know, it's a really interesting way to get a pulse on what's happening with your customers, and I know companies are using it that way. Walmart has something called the Mommy Blog, which I think is fascinating, and it's a group of moms that are Walmart moms that actually provide information to the world about goods and services that they buy at Walmart. Very well followed site about tips and tricks of how to raise children and cooking and all kinds of things that a domestic engineer needs to know. And Walmart has captured that for their brand, which I think is a really fascinating way to use social in a completely different way. So as many ways as there are to use it, as many ideas that are on the phone, and then there's probably another 100 or so. So you have to kind of circle on the ones that are the most meaningful for you.
Yeah, and I recall tweeting to JetBlue last summer, and unfortunately didn't get a seat in first class, but I point taken. I think we have one more question, Laura, and that is data quality. Continues to be a challenge for a lot of different companies, companies that have years of customer data. Do you have any suggestions on how to improve not only new data that's coming in, but existing data that companies already have on hand?
Yeah, there's a lot of bad data out there. We actually, we do a lot of work with customers on what we call matching and cleansing their data. And what that's primarily done very much with the DUNS number, but we're able not only to take a disparate set of data and with large dependency be able to structure and cleanse it in a way that is meaningful to that customer, but we can also keep it that way, right? So it's not a one-time deal. It's sort of like washing your laundry. You can't do it once. You have to do it on a regular basis. And as a result of that, we're able to get customers in a much better place. It's not perfect. Nothing's perfect right now, but it is very, very solid and has tremendously high propensity to cure those exact types of ills when you've got data quality issues. And then I think the second thing is really think about, give some thought of where you're putting your data and whether or not it needs to be all over the place, because it's very expensive for companies to have similar data sources strewn across their enterprises. And it's one of those maintenance things that is hard to fund and get attention on, but it is actually drives a significant amount of time, energy, and money by having multiple data sources. So I think get your data cleaned up, take it to the laundromat, get it cleaned up. And then I think the other thing is try to get actually within your own house, rationalize the number of data sets that you have.
Thank you, Laura. And that's just about all the time we have. I would just like to remind those in the audience that we will be sending out a replay of today's presentation shortly after we sign off. And before we do, Laura, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to close with?
No, I'd like to thank everybody for joining and really appreciate your interest and look forward to continuing the conversation, and have a great day.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, everybody, for joining. And with that, from all of us here at D&B, have a great day.